Welcome to In the Lab with Hoopsology. As always, I am Matt Thomas, joined by my co-host, one of my best friends, Justin Goodrum. Justin, how you doing, man?
Good, man. Good. Can't complain. How about yourself?
Doing great, man. As you know, I was in your new home state this last week
That's
for
right.
spring break. Had a great time, some cabin time, and then sliding through the snow, made my way, thankfully, safely up to
Yeah,
Denver and
right.
got to check out the Bucks versus Nuggets game. So definitely want to talk about that along with some other topics. How's your weekend been?
Good. Not eventful. Just watching March Madness. Like I said it before last time we talked, but continues to be just a crazy tournament. And congrats to San Diego State repping the Mountain West. I mean that might be a little taboo, but for us being fans of the first to whack and now the Mountain West, good to see some representation there. But I am worried, like our buddy said, he's worried that they might go to the Pac-12. So hope that doesn't happen. But we'll see. But nevertheless, enjoy this tournament for now. But congrats to San Diego State.
Yes, well, all these universities are opportunistic like that, so it wouldn't shock me. But I agree with your sentiment there. Congratulations to San Diego State, Kawhi Leonard's alma mater, and also to Florida Atlantic
That's
University.
right.
And what a crazy Final Four matchup that it's guaranteed that one of those two teams will be in the championship game. And our beloved New Mexico Lobos beat San Diego State in the regular season. So,
Right.
hey, at least we can give ourselves like the tiniest of pats on the back that, we beat potentially the national champion or at least a champion finalist if they make it that far.
That's true.
So, an insane tournament all around. We haven't talked about it a whole lot on this podcast, but definitely worth mentioning that it has just been awesome to see throughout the tournament, and the tournament has had great ratings throughout as well. Uh, just really cool to see, and March Madness is still reigning supreme. So, without further ado, let's move into the start of our main topics here, Justin. Before we get into that, we, as usual, will be mentioning some gambling odds, really helpful for framing some of these conversations and giving context to what the experts that have a lot of money on the line are thinking. For that, we will be using bovadasportsbook.com. So let's go ahead and get into it. I had the privilege, as I mentioned earlier, of attending the Nuggets versus Milwaukee Bucks in Denver. And I got to see two of the top three MVP candidates face off against each other. Thankfully, they were both healthy and well, and they were ready to go. Neither of them really disappointed. It felt like a very slow first half for Nikola Jokic. I believe he had 13 points at halftime. Whereas Giannis, I think, was already at 20 some points. I didn't watch on the TV broadcast, but just giving you my recollection here. Giannis in the first 5 minutes. So my son doesn't really have huge basketball allegiance. This was his first NBA game. He's just rooting for the Bucks like incessantly. We're in Ball Arena in Denver, and he's just like shouting like every time Giannis gets a dunk, which I think was like 4 of his first 5 field goals. My son is like standing up and cheering. And I'm just kind of like clapping along, kind of like keeping my arm around him, just making sure he doesn't get booed. But no, the fans were really cool there. No issues like that. But it was just awesome to see a talent as unique as Giannis is in person. I felt the same way when I saw Jokic beat my Rockets last year at Ball Arena. Just someone who really jumps off the court, and you see that contrast a little bit better when you're live and in person, I feel. So really amazing game, very competitive, like 2.5 quarters. And then the Nuggets really impressed me and just blew the doors off essentially, and just ran all over the Bucks at the end of the game. They even sat their starters, I think, with about 6 minutes to go or so. So the Nuggets, I mean, kudos to them. We've said on this podcast that were not really too trusting of their defense. They brought it on that Saturday night. Justin, did you happen to catch highlights of this game? Did anything stand out to you?
I did. Caught some highlights. And what really stood out to me is how complete the Nuggets are as a team.
Mm,
And it was weird because some people probably not going to take this too serious, but I saw them play Chicago, and all of the starters were hurt, and including the Joker. And I just and the Bulls beat them, and that was when Lonzo Ball was healthy. That tells you how long ago this was. But um, just to see how they're able to really keep up with it, really at the time, Chicago was really killing it at the time, and still keep it very competitive with the depth they had in that team. So I think Denver is a serious title contender, and I know they play in like a mid-level market. They're not the flashiest team, but they're one of the most entertaining teams to watch in the league. I mean, I just think just because they're not splashed over the headlines, they don't have the sexiest names. There's a lot of resentment over the Joker possibly being a three-time MVP. There's just a lot of kind of hate on that squad that I think is unnecessary. So they kind of get buried behind just the more sexier teams in the league. But I mean, they're going to be a title contender, and I think the expectations of them being in the NBA Finals, I think, is not unrealistic. I think that's that's going to be right into a radar in terms of their expectations in the playoffs.
yeah, it's so weird because the West is, it feels like simultaneously super competitive and simultaneously a disaster. And we'll talk about more of that as we go along in the show. Speaking of title odds, I did look them up again on Bovada, and the Nuggets right now are fourth in title odds at plus 800. The Bucks in first at plus 300. So really cool. And I'm glad, we planned this trip a long time ago. My family did to go to this game. I'm just so glad that things played out the way they did, that both those players were playing, as I said earlier, but also that they're both two out of the three top dogs in the MVP race that's going on. And I think just to close out the game, I do think this is a big statement win for Denver. And I think it's just one last little stamp on Jokic's resume as we get closer and closer to the end of the season, which is where technically the MVP race ends in the regular season. So let's talk about the MVP race real quickly. Embiid has had some kind of confusing quotes of late about the MVP, but nonetheless, he remains on Bovada the odds-on favorite for the MVP at minus 125, Jokic in second at plus 120, and Giannis in third at plus 600. So there's your sort of three-player race for MVP as it stands right now. You do have Tatum and Luka, who we'll talk about later, who are in the mix as well, but they are far behind now. There's a huge gap between Giannis and Tatum at third and fourth there. So I think it's a bummer because we just got news today that Embiid is not going to face off against Jokic. A lot of analysts disappointed in that. I'm disappointed in that too, especially given that Embiid seems kind of nonchalant about the whole thing and like it doesn't really matter, which then makes me as someone, if I did have a vote, I'd be saying, okay, well then maybe you don't value this award. And we have this weird thing where we heard rumors last week of, this MVP argument has really, really demoralized and affected Jokic. Like, and this was when the Nuggets were slumping. So you're like, okay, well, that's weird. I mean, we get you're selfless and a great player and all that. Yes, we all acknowledge that. But like, do you want this MVP? Like, come on. And then we hear these comments from Embiid, and it shouldn't be the determinant. Of course, it should just purely be on performance. But when you hear statements like this, for my money, I just say, give it to Giannis then, because this guy is trying hard, and his team is at the top of the East. Now, of course, all three of these guys are trying hard and playing hard, but kind of an odd dynamic. Embiid's still the favorite. Justin, what are you kind of predicting now with this MVP race? We don't have many games left to go. I think about a little over 10 games for most of the teams left.
Yeah, I don't really have a clear answer, and it's weird how they're putting so much pressure on themselves to win this award because the end game is the championship. Like, I mean, all three of these teams are in line to win the title. So if they win MVP, but they lose in the NBA Finals or get bounced in the conference finals, like they're gonna take way more crap on that. And then, honestly, the MVP is probably more of a burden anyway if they win it, and if they're disappointing in the playoffs. So personally, take to answer your question, I really like Giannis or Embiid. That's like the two front runners. Yeah, I think it's gonna be really difficult for the Joker to just get that 3P. I just think it's gonna be so tough. This including this in regards to the narrative, his style of play, I just don't see it gonna be resonating in other journalists' minds when they're picking who's going to be the best player in the league, and especially when it's so tight. I mean, it's so close. I could see if there was really no one else to challenge him, but it's so close, and I think this is going to be an excuse to give it to somebody else, despite Embiid just complaining about it consistently. So
It's going to be so fascinating to see how the vote turns out and what the justification is one way or the other,
agree.
because with three front runners like this and so many different narratives out there, I mean, you can use like the two-way player type of argument to argue Embiid and Giannis over Jokic potentially. You could use that plus minus stat that Jokic is dominating that I quoted last week to argue for Jokic. You could, of course, say the remove Jokic from the Nuggets, and they're much worse off than the Bucks or the Sixers removing those stars potentially. There's just so many different ways you can take this. So I think in some ways, it's kind of like the what is it like the ink block test. Like what do you see? This is projecting your psychology as a voter with who you're picking. But I love that it is a tight race, and it's a legitimately interesting conversation, even with all the silliness that has gone on in some things that you and I have both seen. There are some legitimately interesting narratives there too, if you look for them. And just to kind of tie a bow on the championship odds with all this, we mentioned, of course, the Bucks being first place, best odds to be NBA champion on Bovada, Nuggets in fourth. And then in sixth, you have the 76ers. So that's how your MVP candidate teams are shaping up. And any thoughts on MVP before we move on to the next topic, Justin?
I don't. I think it kind of ties in our other topics just because of Morant and Luka. They were MVP candidates as well, but for different reasons, they have fallen out of being in contention. So we'll get to it.
Right on, moving right along. Then I wanted to talk about someone who is big in the headlines who is back. And that, of course, is John Morant. In some ways, it oddly feels like he never left. It seemed, at least to me, maybe part of it was being on vacation, but seemed like he actually wasn't gone all that long compared to things that we were hearing and sort of the doom and gloom projections that were out there that like we might not see him again this year. Well, he's back. He was kind enough to come back this past Wednesday against the Houston Rockets and just lay the smackdown on them and break my heart in the fourth quarter. So thanks, Ja. Just kidding, of course. But in all seriousness, the Grizzlies have won their last 6 games. They seem like they haven't really missed a beat. If anything, Jaren Jackson Jr., Triple J, just got more experience being kind of the lead of that offense for a little while Ja was out. He right now, by the way, on Bovada is second in odds for Defensive Player of the Year at plus 140. Um, the two main issues that they're going to have, I think, moving into the playoffs are that Steven Adams is being reevaluated in 1 month for that PCL sprain that he has, and that's just being reevaluated. So who knows if he's coming back. And of course, as we mentioned before, Brandon Clark, one of their main contributing scorers off the bench, is out for the season with his Achilles tear. But how are you feeling about this team now? I mean, did we get too wrapped up in the Ja incident hype? Do you see them where do you kind of see their ceiling now that Ja's back and they are clicking on all cylinders again?
Yeah. So the good news is that as we record on this podcast, they're on a winning streak. I believe it is 6 games.
That's
It
right.
is. So that proves great for them. And also, that seemed to fuel them while Ja was out. It seems like they had a chip on their shoulder. So that's good news. Bad news is with Morant back and with the pressure only going to be increased. Let's face it, the Grizzlies are inexperienced in terms of super high pressure situations. And we've seen it throughout, NBA history, the first time entering the playoffs, especially, the Western Conference Finals, the finals, like really Game 7, really high pressure scenarios. And I realize the Grizzlies have been there before, but when you get to the finals, we are dealing with just more expectations because the Grizzlies, they're not like a surprise team. This is not a team coming out of nowhere. This is
Yeah.
not like, hey, they're having a great season. They're a Cinderella. This team has expectations now, and Ja Morant is the front man. And if he does not meet them, I mean, let's say he has a couple of bad games in the Western Conference Finals, how's he going to react? How's he going to take all the jokes in terms of, what happened with him early? I mean, he's not going to get any sympathy. They're going to be coming for him. How's he going to be able to handle that? We don't know. And
And now they have dirt on him. Yeah.
yep. So I am skeptical when the pressure is at its highest, how he's going to handle it. And I think, again, they're not playing, no disrespect to my Chicago Bulls. They're not playing my Bulls in the playoffs. They're playing elite Western Conference teams. So, if he has a bad game, if Memphis, the others, supporting players, of his teammates, they play well, that's not going to be enough against, other elite Western Conference teams. So that is a concern. That is my worry because I didn't have that entering this season. I think that is a legitimate concern heading into the playoffs for them because I would consider them, along with Denver, a huge favorite to be a representative coming out of that conference.
Yeah, speaking of which, right now the Grizzlies on Bovada are the eighth best odds to be NBA champion, and that is the fifth ranked team in the Western Conference at plus 1400, just behind the Clippers. Interestingly enough, I see the Timberwolves right now sitting in seventh, who would be their first round matchup if the playoffs were today, and
What a
assuming the
comeback
play-in
season.
tournament. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's true. But my other point was going to be if the Timberwolves keep on their winning ways of late, they would leapfrog the Warriors, and we could potentially get that Grizzlies Warriors matchup in the first round, which would be kind of interesting if things landed that way. The Warriors would be then in a more inferior position even than they were last year. I mean, last year that didn't matter, as we all know. They wound up being champs, but we could just go ahead and kind of rip that Band-Aid off right in the first round potentially this year, depending on how this shakes out. But I think if you're a Grizzlies fan right now, you're feeling pretty good. You're breathing a sigh of relief that Ja Morant is back, and this team, if anything, they kind of got out of the funk that they were in right before Ja Morant got suspended. So it's oddly, um, in spite of the chaos around Ja Morant, oddly for this team, it may have been that that sort of struggle that they needed to bind together and rise up. So this certainly gives them, like you said, it gives material for teams and opposing fans to use against Ja Morant. And I think that's a real legit point. The counter to that, I guess, is if they feel that sense like they did last year of being the underdogs and being
It's
able
true.
to use that as motivation. That could be the long-term positive of it. Of course, only time will tell. Um, Anything else on the Grizzlies before we move to another Western Conference team in some chaos right now?
No, let's get to more drama.
All right, let's keep the drama going. D for drama, D for disaster, D for Dallas is who we're talking about right now with all of this. And of course, the Dallas Mavericks. At the time of the recording of this podcast, the Mavericks are 36 and 39, below 500. More importantly, they are in 11th place in the Western Conference, meaning they, If the season ended today, they would not even be in the play-in tournament. And you and I both ranked Luka last week as a top 10 player in the NBA right now, among current active players. They've lost their last 4 games. They're 3-7 in their last 10 games. Of course, they have Kyrie Irving there. I believe they are 6-10 as of right now when Kyrie Irving plays. So things not going well in Dallas, to put this lightly. Justin, I'll just put it bluntly. How disappointing would this be for Dallas to miss the play-in tournament?
Oh, massive. I mean, when they got Kyrie, people were saying, are they going to win the title? So
It's
it's
true.
a massive disappointment. At the same time, for Mavericks fans, so it's tough, right? Because you have two, probably of the top 20 players in the league. So expectations are going to be high. At the same time, there is a acclimation process. You have to wonder about the pieces around them moving forward. Kyrie Irving changed the dynamics of that team, and I don't think they're expecting Kyrie to be available at the beginning of the season. So I think there is time for the Mavericks to adapt, but at the same time, next season, depending on how things work out, there's going to be a lot of massive expectations on this team. I mean, if they underdeliver, I think there's going to be some huge questions on Luka in terms of his legacy or not. He is a fantastic player, but I think we're going to get into, like you said, Matt. I think your prediction was correct, into James Harden territory in terms
Mm.
of this guy being a great player, but is he a superstar that can lead your team to the promised land? And I guess probably next season, if we see something similar to this season, I think that he's going to be on him pretty tremendously, to say the least.
Interesting. I do think there is potentially maybe a little bit more urgency though, because if they don't if they don't make the play-in tournament, do they guaranteed get Kyrie Irving to sign and return next year?
That's true.
And
True.
that's kind of the thing hanging in the balance for this team, right? Is if they don't even make the play-in tournament, I mean, what is really the incentive for Kyrie to come back unless he just really enjoys Dallas? Guaranteed. I know people might frame it different ways, but guaranteed Kyrie would get offers from other teams this offseason.
But
Uh,
but with Kyrie, didn't he demand a trade out of Brooklyn?
for sure.
Look where the Nets were, right? Like the Nets weren't struggling, like they were a
Right.
contender to win the East. So at
Right.
this point, we don't know what his motivation is. Like, what does this guy want to do? I mean, like you say, you may love Dallas and may love playing with Luca. Like winning may not be necessarily his priority. So we don't know what he wants, to be honest.
Yeah,
It's
that's
just a
yeah,
weird
fair
situation.
point.
Yeah,
Fair point. I think, in Brooklyn, it certainly got personal.
it
I think
did.
after he was suspended for those reasons,
Sure.
that we all know and have talked about. But so I think for sure that was like personal get away from that organization. I think there are still enough teams, in spite of the many stops that Kyrie has had. I think there are still teams that are willing to sign for the oohs and ahs that he brings when he plays at peak level that he's still capable of from time to time. Um, but yeah, I mean, how many bridges can you burn? That is a question that is fair to ask. Certainly. Um, Interestingly enough, I mean, maybe uh, a silver lining here for Mavericks fans. Your team is still on Bovada 10th best in terms of odds to be NBA champion. So, if nothing else, it speaks to Vegas's respect for Luka as that star of that franchise, I would say, because that's pretty much the only thing right now that you're hanging your hat on is Luka is playing awesome, even when a 40-12-8 performance isn't enough to get things done. He's still able to do it. Those odds are plus 2,500, by the way, to be NBA champions. So yeah, I think there's a lot of questions in Dallas. I think as they are reviewing what they did, I do wonder if now they acknowledge, like, we gave up too much of something that we needed desperately in getting rid of Dory Finney-Smith. Um, we don't have the defense that we need, and we already didn't have the rebounding that we so desperately need. Christian Wood coming over from the Rockets, he's not a rebounder. That's been pretty clear throughout the season. He hasn't been able to fill that role. He's been a good pick and roll partner with Luka at times and things like that, but a lot of problems in Dallas. And you could take it in so many ways because you have your star if you can keep him. And as much as I questioned Luka's heart last week, I will say that I don't I don't blame him a whole lot for Dallas's overall struggle. Like, I think that does keep him from MVP conversation. You picked Luka for MVP in our start of the season prediction,
I
and
did.
I thought
Yeah.
that was a great pick. I was not ripping on you for making that pick, and I don't think anyone was. So speaks to more to the mismanagement of Dallas rather than Luka not being able to take care of business. I mean, we've already seen glimpses of him doing that in the playoffs, even more so than James Harden has to this point. And James Harden, of course, has had a much longer career. So yeah, very interesting. We'll keep an eye on that situation in Dallas for sure, and we will be talking about that again if they do not make the play-in tournament. I can guarantee you that. Last question for you, Justin, as we move in to the end of this podcast. One thing that happened in the most recent Mavericks game where they shamefully lost against the, I'm sorry, but pathetic Charlotte Hornets. They lost twice in a row, back to back against the Hornets. Something was said. So we don't know the full details. I have to say that right off the bat. But something was said by a fan that bothered Kyrie Irving. This is not the first time this has ever happened in an NBA game. I can think of LeBron James doing this. I can think of Russell Westbrook doing this in different cases. But is something that I think visually watching a game is very odd to see unfold, and then you have no context as to what happened that justified it. And what I'm referring to is we get a stoppage of play, and Kyrie Irving walks, I would say, about 3/4 of the way across the court with an official and points out to security, a gentleman, well, maybe not a gentleman, depending on what was said, but a person who was sitting out in the crowd, and just has him removed from the game. Just tell them, get him out of here. Again, I don't know what he said. There were rumors that I saw that he was saying that the earth is round to mock Kyrie Irving for that infamous flat earth interview a couple years back, several years back at this point. My question here to get to the point is it's weird optics to see a player kicking out a fan, and I don't think a player on the other side of things should have the responsibility to be like security and managing this situation. Is it Should it be allowable for players to just say to presumably a paying customer, like, get out of here? And should we be given more info on why that happened?
So let me ask you a question, Matt. So you saw the Nuggets play the Rockets last year.
Right.
You were close.
We had
Correct
nice
me if I'm
ticket.
wrong, right?
That's right.
How much security was around in that area? Would you say? Not ticket people,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
actual like security.
Yeah, that's a good question. It was probably maybe half a dozen
Oh
security
wow,
members on the floor, maybe a
so
little bit
quite a
more
lot.
than that. Of course, we're talking more than a year ago that I was at that game, so my memory could be hazy. I don't remember a whole lot of security, I guess is my point.
Gotcha. Okay, so it's tough because
It is. Yeah.
back in the I guess and the a lot of the NBA old timers, the good old days, like with Charles Barkley, we are talking about this off air. He punched fans, he spit on fans, like just because of the heinous stuff they were calling him. And they weren't, I don't think they were ragging on him because of his field goal percentage. It was racial. And I think from that regard, athletes pointing out fans, and I see it in a fairly calm manner, except Russell Westbrook, I don't have a problem with. I think the issue now, are there negatives for sure? Right? Like, what are these fans actually saying? And I think you get into, ruining the fan experience, right? Like, me and you were in college, right, Matt? Like, along
For
with our
sure.
buddies, I mean, we took pleasure in hazing the other team. Now, not and now it goes over the line. I think we've seen that now with the advent of social media. Race gets brought into it,
Yeah.
personal lies get
Not with
brought
us,
into
but
it.
certainly
Yeah,
certainly can.
yeah, not with us in college, but just
Right.
other fans nowadays. So it gets really, really personal. So things go over the line. So I think, like you said, that's where security needs to be mindful. I think a code of conduct with the fans would be the most appropriate. And that's obvious, right? Like nothing racial, anti Semitic, sexist, homophobic. I mean, those are basic things that should not be said in any venue of entertainment. And I
Yeah.
think for security should take care of that. I think where you get into sketchy territories, like with the flat Earth, I don't have a problem with the fans saying that. I don't have a problem with um, him talking to Kyrie, being like, "Hey, like I don't know, if you miss five free throws in a row, that would never happen." But let's just say he's struggling at the line, like you suck from from the line, like you're a bum. Like I don't. To me, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I think I don't know what is the old adage, and if I get inappropriate, I apologize. But wasn't it like a senator, like he was saying, like, how do you spot obscene content? Like you kind of know it when you see it, right?
Right,
Like
right.
we know what's obscene. I mean, come on, it doesn't take too much of a genius to decipher that. So I think I agree with the security being the first line of defense, but I would say compared to fans, I'm sorry, compared to athletes laying their hands on fans or it getting physical. I agree with the um, athlete pointing out the fan. If that's going to avoid another mouse in the palace situation, then so be it. But is there another way for sure? This puts have security, just be more mindful of what's going on.
Right. Yeah, and I guess my kind of larger point is I think the NBA right now with many of its fans, I think there's an image problem. There's a problem with load management. There is a narrative that's going around that players just don't care about the fans, like, whatever, I'm going to take a night off. Those things do happen from time to time, of course, just naturally. It seems like it's happening more and more, and it's not really a big deal. Like there was the incident in Cleveland, I want to say about 20 games back or so, where it just seemed like star players were always ducking out when they were playing in Cleveland, which is not great for Cleveland fans who are paying to go to games. And I'm so grateful that, again, the game I went to, the Stars were all playing. Everyone who was healthy and available were playing. That's not always the case in these NBA games. It gives off the optics that the players just don't care about the fans. Now, by far, in my opinion, this is still far more the exception than the rule. When you add that with optics of a player just being able to point to someone and they're out of here, I think there is certainly there needs to be a process in that person getting kicked out. Now, I don't want to go to bat for that guy that Kyrie got kicked out from that game. I mean, he could have been saying something awful. I just
That's
don't
true.
know.
We don't know what it is.
So yeah, so it's all hearsay and I don't know. So I'm not gonna sit here and defend him. I think my point would be I would just want to see some kind of process that the NBA has. Like Kyrie talks to security, they talk to fans around him. Can they vouch for him or not? Now we can't fully rely on that either. You know, if he's surrounded by his buddies or whatever, like they're not going to rat him out or whatever. I don't know. It's a messy topic. I definitely agree with that. But to me, it's just weird to have a break in the game and a player like kick out a fan. Like, can we at least have some sort of go between, like go talk to security, describe the fan so that we don't have the optics of a player like you get out of here. And yes, of course, I'm with you. I don't want things to escalate to fighting in the stands and stuff like that. Yeah, nobody wants to see that, especially not the NBA who's trying to, protect their image. And this is, in my opinion, part of it.
Yeah, a couple of points. One, I think there's just a lack of security at all sporting events. I just think there's footage that gets leaked online about fans fighting.
Oh
There's
yeah.
been multiple
Yeah.
incidents, specifically in Major League Baseball, fans, getting seriously hurt. So I think that's due to a lack of security. So that should be improved. And I agree with you. There should be a clear SOP in terms of, hey, player has a problem with the fan, security is in the vicinity. What happened, in terms of that incident? You know, is it warrant to get the fan out of there? Is it not? And then go from there. So I agree with you.
For sure. We could talk circles around this all day. We've had a good episode covering these most current topics here, the latest and greatest headlines. If you guys made it this far with us, really appreciate you sticking out with us. Thank you so much for your listening, your support. You can get in touch with the show, hoopsologypod@gmail.com. Any mailbag questions you might have. You can find us anywhere on social media, Hoopsology Pod. Justin, any last words before we get out of here?
No, you summed it up really well. Just check out our archived interviews, a lot of evergreen content just to suit your basketball needs. So just check out our entire library.
Absolutely. For Justin Goodrum, I'm Matt Thomas. Thank you as always for joining us, and peace out.
See ya.